Good morning.
Good morning.
How's it going, Matt?
It's going pretty good. How you doing, Steven?
I'm doing well. Are you all ready to go?
Yeah. I'm ready to roll. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm good. Well, happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day.
And of course, we're talking a couple days before, but I'll be publishing this on Earth Day. I thought we could start just with an introduction to you and what got you interested in this whole conversation of chalk, the environmental impacts of chalk, and what led you to this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can start with a little bit about my background. So I live in Austin. I've been here about 11 years, but I've been climbing for more than 25 years. I first bouldered around 95 or 96, if I remember right. And I got really into it in the late 90s, worked in a few gyms, that sort of thing. And I've been climbing pretty consistently ever since. I'm not sending 514s or V12s or anything crazy like that, but I do enjoy it, and I've found some ways to stay strong and healthy and injury free over the long haul. So I plan on climbing for many more decades to come.
Mm.
That's kind of the general background. Do you want me to get into my background on chalk too, or?
Yeah. Let's dive into it. Is this something you studied? Do you have some scientific background, or yeah? How did this interest come into play?
No, I don't have any science background. I have an English degree and an MBA, but so how I got into chalk. So a couple of different factors converged. So first of all, when COVID hit last year, I pretty quickly realized that liquid chalk is effectively the same formula as hand sanitizer. So I thought that maybe a dual use product that you could call chalk, liquid chalk, but you could also say it's hand sanitizer might be able to help us all get back into the gym sooner. But after a few calls to the FDA, the EPA, some attorneys, I realized that calling liquid chalk hand sanitizer, or even hinting at it as hygienic or sanitizing properties, that was a complete non-starter, and the FDA and the EPA were having none of it. So I know there are some companies that are hinting at that anyway, but I personally didn't want to go there after what I learned. In the meanwhile, I'd done a lot of experimentation, a lot of research on chalk, and just started uncovering a lot of the environmental impacts of chalk that I hadn't really considered, in my 25 years of climbing. So that was part of it. The other piece of the puzzle was that I have eczema on my hands. And so eczema is just a fancy word for very dry hands. And liquid chalk, as you probably know, is pretty much just alcohol and chalk and maybe a few other ingredients. And alcohol and chalk are both very drying for hands, so it tends to exacerbate my eczema. So I wanted to come up with a formula that would also not destroy my hands, because it's when I lived in Colorado, for example, it was so dry there that my hands were often so dry and cracked and bleeding that I couldn't actually climb. So it was kind of a catch-22, moving to a great climbing area and then not being able to climb. So
Wow, yeah.
So all that to say is I did a lot of research, a lot of experimentation, a year of quarantine, and lo and behold, I found myself in the chalk business, and so that's how I ended up here, and how I learned so much about chalk in this past year.
That's so interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if we can even touch this without giving away all your proprietary secrets, but I'd love to hear, like, what are some of the things that you discovered? I mean, you sell liquid chalk now, and I had a chance to use a sample that you sent me the other day, and it was great. I thought it was a great product. It felt like other liquid chalks that I've used. I've got pretty sweaty hands, so I like the alcohol as an extra drying agent, especially on a warm day. But yeah, what are some of the other, would you be willing to share like some of the other ingredients that you played with, and some of the things that have helped your own skin condition, and how you've kind of balanced the product? I'm interested in that.
Yeah. So I wanted to keep it pretty simple, and I'm also kind of a health nut, so I wanted to make sure that it was a pretty natural product and not full of synthetic ingredients. And so one of the things that I wanted, because despite having dry hands, I also have sweaty hands, ironically. So I wanted something that could keep me pretty dry, but also give me just a little extra tackiness. And so there are a number of similar kind of products in other sports that are liquid chalk or spray on grip and this sort of thing. And they almost all include pine rosin, which goes by a number of different names: resin, pine tar, sap, colophony. And that stuff is bad news for climbing. It works great. It makes your hands just feel like gecko fingers. You can grip on anything, but it comes off on the rock and builds up on rock over time and gums them up, and it's not water soluble. So there's an area in, I think, France that has allowed this ingredient for a long time. And I've never been there, but my understanding is that it's like the holds are very gummed up there. And so you don't want to use pine tar. So what I did instead was just a very small amount of honey. And the honey has a couple of cool properties. One, it doesn't really come off on the rock, especially in the minute quantities that I'm using, but it gives you just a little bit of tackiness, and that keeps the chalk on your fingers. As you know, a lot of times when you chalk up, once you've hit a few holds, a lot of it's already gone. And so this kind of keeps it from flaking off and dusting down to the ground. So the other thing about honey is that it is water soluble. So you don't have to worry about it gumming up the holds forever. The other two pieces that I included in this particular formula are Epsom salt and essential oils. So the essential oils smell nice, which is great, and give it the scented flavors, if you will. But the other purpose of them is that they help moisturize your skin and when you're done climbing. So you wash off your hands, and that actually activates the oils, and the Epsom salt help the oils penetrate a little deeper into the skin. And together, when you finish climbing, you wash your hands, and you actually, instead of feeling dried out, they feel a little bit moisturized. I mean, it's still chalk and you're still climbing and it's hard on your skin, but it keeps your skin a little healthier than just chalk and alcohol would.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I never would have guessed honey, and I noticed the scent. So I guessed the essential oils, but I didn't stop to think about what else that might be doing for your skin. So yeah, that's so interesting. How has that worked out with your own condition with eczema? Is it a product that's working well for you?
It is. And admittedly, I haven't been climbing this past year. I've been training a lot at home and practicing on the outside of the house and on, some local rocks that I find. I mean, I hesitate to call them boulders, but, just secret little spots where I can go try it out. But, and then of course the hangboards and all that. So it's been working well, for me, and my hands are not getting dried out like they normally would. And it helps soften the calluses a little bit too. Okay.
Yeah, cool. I did notice that when I put a first layer on it, it did seem, there's, I kind of categorize chalk in two broad categories, like crappy chalk and pretty good chalk. And I don't know if it's kind of like wine. I don't know if I can really tell the difference between all the good chalks, but it did seem to really stick to my hands. And I'm guessing that was the honey. So yeah, that's really interesting. Let's shift gears. I'd love to get into what led you to reach out to me and your research into the sustainability or the environmental impacts of chalk and what you discovered there. You sent me a really comprehensive article from your website about the environmental impacts of chalk. And I was hoping we could just kind of go down and hit some of the key points that you discovered through your research.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a number of different ways. Well, let me back up. So as I started designing my chalk formula and thinking through wow, is this something that I actually want to sell commercially? Because I like it, my friends like using it. I wanted to make sure that we could do it sustainably. That's important. And especially given that, chalk is something we don't often think a whole lot about as climbers. It's almost like, oh, that thing we spent a few dollars on, but wow, I dropped $175 on my shoes or buy an expensive rope or that sort of thing. But the difference is that you buy your shoes, once in a while, depending on how often you climb. It's not, it's not a frequent purchase. Whereas chalk is a repeat purchase. So over time, you can actually end up buying a lot of the product. And so that has a potential to have a much bigger environmental impact from all of our gear. So that said, I wanted to make sure that if I was going to do something that I was doing it as sustainably as I could. And so I started diving into it. And the impacts of chalk, the big one, the first one is the mining. It's a non-reusable or non-renewable resource. Anything that we use, they got to dig it up somewhere. Everything's either dug up or grown somewhere. And chalk is mostly mined in China. And for a long time, the conditions around the local communities, where these chalk mines are in China, for both people and the ecosystem, was negatively impacted. And chalk would build up in the soil, and when it gets wet, it forms a kind of a crust called hydromagnesite. There's been a number of studies on the local ecosystems, the health impacts, that sort of thing. So that was a big problem. China, to their credit, has actually implemented a lot of reforms around mining of magnesium carbonate or chalk. And so it's a lot better than it used to be. Now, there are a few other places where you can get chalk. There's some in Europe. There's not really much in the Americas, but so there's a few other places, but 99% of it comes from China. So that's the big one. But then there's obviously the carbon footprint of shipping chalk around the world. So once they dig it up, it ends up going through to and fro through a number of intermediaries before it reaches your door. And every time it ships somewhere, then that's a big carbon footprint. But then there's also a lot of packaging, a lot of plastic, and almost all of that ends up in a landfill. Then there's when we climb, it falls off of our hands. It ends up around the soils and in the plants or on the plants around the climbing areas. It also ends up all over the rock, even places where it's not visible. And then there's, of course, micro spills of chalk all over the place when chalk bags get dropped or kicked over or whatever. And then, lastly, there's the visible aspect of chalk staying on the wall like graffiti, which a number of parks, national parks, some local parks are starting to ban chalk. Like Garden of the Gods just last week banned chalk and chalk substitutes in any color from use in the park. That's in Colorado Springs. So there's a number of different impacts, and they're all a little bit different. There's the carbon footprint, but then there's the mining, there's landfills, and then there's the visible aspect of it.
Yeah, interesting. So in your email, you laid some of this out, and then I was caught by a single sentence. You said, while I'm not anti-chalk, I do believe we as climbers could do better. So let's get into that. Let's get into some of the key things that you're doing differently with your company, or just maybe even we could start with just best practices. Like, what are some of the things that we can do to minimize our impact? Assuming that, we're all going to keep climbing and using chalk.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say, and there's a number of things that I'll discuss here, but the big one is, and this is true for chalk, this is true for all equipment, this is true for anything that we buy. Businesses will respond to consumer demand. So if we demand better from our businesses, from the chalk companies or the equipment companies, if we demand better practices, then eventually we'll get that. And so I would say that's the big takeaway in terms of what we can do. But more specifically, there are a number of alternatives. The first one, obviously, is don't use chalk. Some climbers don't. I mean, personally, I'm kind of a chalk monster. And
what does that mean?
It just means you use a lot of chalk. I have the nervous habit of like, oh, I'm tired, or I'm sort of thinking through this next move, so I'm just going to take this opportunity to chalk up about 6 more times.
Right.
But some people don't use chalk, and if you can manage that, that's great. As I mentioned, it's already banned in some places. There are chalk alternatives. I think it's Metolius has a type of chalk that's actually not made of chalk. It's some sort of plant-based thing. So there are some alternatives. Or along the same lines, you can just use less chalk. So you can use a chalk ball that tends to use less chalk than just dipping your hand into loose or powdered chalk. You can also use a towel, like a little golf towel or something, and clip it to your harness and dry your hands off that way. So that's the most obvious one, but for a lot of us, it's not realistic. Partly it's that nervous habit, but partly, chalk, while some people think that it has dubious benefit, I don't. I think that it has a great benefit. And so I'm going to keep using it. You can obviously clean your routes after you climb. And sometimes that's more realistic than others. It depends on what you're climbing and, how much time you have, but it's certainly a practice. And, maybe we will see more of that in the future, but right now it's, not very commonly practiced. You can use colored chalk, which some parks that have some limitations on chalk, such as national parks, require you to use chalk that matches the color of the local rock, like gray or different browns or what have you. And that helps with the visible aspect, not leaving the sort of graffiti behind, but it doesn't really affect the other issues. The next one is using liquid chalk. And that's a good one for a number of reasons. One, it tends to use less chalk than dipping your hands into chalk a lot. It doesn't tend to flake off as easily as just a chalk bag full of loose chalk. And well, all that to say, it lasts longer and uses less. Climbers tend to use less. And then lastly, you can find companies that do use compostable packaging. You can find companies that use refillable or recyclable bottles. We use organic ingredients when we can. You can look for companies, and this is a little harder to research, but you can find companies that vertically integrate their supply chain, which helps limit that sort of back and forth logistics of getting the chalk to your door. So instead of sort of zipping back and forth across every continent on your way here, it's just more of a straight shot. So that's an option. Or just, find companies that have a strong environmental ethos and good practices that they let you know about.
Yeah, I'm thinking of myself here as a sport climber. I mean, I really like liquid chalk and I use it pretty often, especially in the warmer months. But for sport climbing, it's very difficult to chalk. You can't really chalk up on the wall with liquid chalk unless you're sitting in a hole, a pod or something like that, or a no hands. I've known a couple people to get into a knee bar and pull chalk out of their sports bra, but that's not every route you get to do that. So I usually use liquid chalk at the base of the route and then have a chalk bag with loose chalk to continue chalking up throughout the route. Any thoughts there? Any thoughts on, if you are using, like, I prefer powdered chalk. I really do think it is my favorite for performance. I really feel like it makes a little bit of a difference. And any thoughts on what I could do there to, improve my practices?
Not a lot at the present time. You're absolutely right. It is hard to chalk up with liquid chalk along the way, and so a lot of folks, including myself, use it as more of a base layer, and then we'll still use the loose chalk as you go. You can also, as I mentioned, keep a towel with you, and that can help minimize some of the chalk usage that you need. But what this industry really needs is a dispenser that you can use one-handed while climbing. And you can get a little retractable lanyard like ours has. Those are pretty easy to find on Amazon or wherever that you can at least keep it with you, so you don't have to worry about dropping it. But ideally what we're going to need to do is redesign the dispensers, and that's a much more involved project to basically create a whole new plastic product and design it, and then create the injection molding and all that sort of thing, so you can do that. So that's where I hope we can get to in the coming years.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Little chalk pump on your harness instead of a chalk bag.
Yeah, or just something, I've even been sort of, I'm an inventor. I'm always tinkering, so I've been sort of sketching out some different ideas for what that might look like. Yeah, obviously, I'd have to prototype it out and test a few options to see, but I think that could help solve the problem a little bit.
Okay, interesting. Is there anything else we want to get into more detail as far as Earth Day? I mean, you mentioned getting the chalk on the plants and in the soil around the climbs. It's easy for me to just kind of assume that that's bad. Have you looked very deeply into what that actually does to the local ecology around climbing areas?
Yeah, I have, and there's not a ton of research, but there is some.
Okay.
So there's one professor at a Chinese university who has been studying the ecological impacts, mostly on the flora around the mines in China and the surrounding landscapes. And so that can serve as sort of a proxy for what's happening at the local crag. But admittedly, the orders of magnitude are very different. The amount of chalk that's coming out of a mine versus the amount of chalk that's drifting down off of a wall is orders of magnitude different.
Mm.
But nonetheless, they've documented some pretty severe negative impacts in China. Now, there was another study that I found that was here in the U.S. that they were looking at the impact of chalk on rock-based flora. So that's your mosses, your lichens, your little plants that grow on the side of routes, that sort of thing. And pretty much anywhere on the crag, they would test and see, even if it wasn't visible, that you couldn't see any chalk, there was still a measurable amount of chalk there, and it was having a measurable impact on the local flora. There haven't been, to my knowledge, any studies on fauna, on animals, and but having studied systems theory and biology, at least as an amateur biologist, anytime you impact flora, you're going to impact fauna, you're going to impact the whole ecosystem. So, again, I think that there's an opportunity there for a lot more research, but what they have discovered, every research or every study that's been done has shown that there is a negative impact of the chalk. It's where you're touching it. It's near, and it's also on the rest of the rock. It's also, anywhere where the chalk can sort of drift down from where we're climbing. So all the soils around too.
So I'm thinking about loose chalk. I mean, I still, this is one of those conversations where this is really compelling, but I think it's going to be hard for me to let go of my current practices to some degree. But I do think that, reducing our consumption is, a step in the right direction, at least, even if we don't eliminate it. One thing that I've gotten a lot better at, I was very much a nervous or just compulsive chalker, like you're describing. I would stand there at the climbing gym and just have my hands inside my bouldering bucket and just be, staring at the wall, studying a route or talking to someone and just chalking up the entire time. That's a habit I've really worked to mitigate. And then I think another thing that has really helped not just my use of chalk, but also my climbing is occasionally just practicing climbing without chalk at all. Or maybe you chalk up once at the base of a sport climb, either in the gym or like maybe a warm-up climb outside. And then actually just leave your chalk bag on the ground or leave it closed and just try to climb the whole route without chalking up. And I think that can be a really good practice in removing some of that hesitation from our climbing movement. It's so easy to just use chalking up as an excuse to pause and hesitate when we could just flow through a sequence. So I think that's an interesting thing to try, and obviously reduces our amount of chalk. But I'm curious, do you have any other simple tricks like that? I know something in your article, you talked about refilling chalk bags and how that's such a common, occurrence where we accidentally pour extra chalk onto the ground. Do you have any other simple tricks or anything that we can do to reduce our use of chalk or reduce contamination from chalk?
Yeah, for one, fill your chalk bags at home or not somewhere where a spill is going to end up in the,
Mm.
on plants and on the dirt. So that's one simple trick. Go to the car if you need to. Obviously we don't want chalk all over our car either, but it's easier to vacuum up out of the back seat than it is, the soil. So that's a simple trick.
That's a good one.
Uh, you know, Chalk balls. I'm not a huge fan of using chalk balls personally, but they do tend to limit your chalk usage. And to your point too about trying to climb without it, sometimes I often forget about temperature. When it's colder temperature, you're just not sweating as much. The grip on the rock is a lot better. You don't really need it if it's 40, 50, 60 degrees versus if you're climbing and it's 90 and humid and sunny. So try to keep that kind of thing in mind. Like, do I really need this right now? Or is this just a nervous habit or just an unconscious practice?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks. Those are good ones. One other question I had with your liquid chalk. I mean, like I said, I just tried a sample yesterday and tried it for a few routes, and I liked it. But one thing I run into with liquid chalk in the past, and I've especially encountered this in bouldering gyms where you're not allowed to use powdered chalk, especially in the last year with COVID. There's been some gyms
Mm-hmm.
where you're only allowed to use liquid. Or on a hot sport climbing day, maybe I'm climbing the whole weekend and I'm doing a lot of pitches. I find that the repeated use of liquid chalk and the alcohol and things like that really does seem to kind of degrade the quality of my skin over the course of a
Mm-hmm.
long day of bouldering or a long weekend of sport climbing. And I'd love to hear, you already spoke to some of these different ingredients, but what is your experience with that? I mean, is that a little bit inevitable? Like, does the alcohol? It seems like the alcohol has a harsh impact on the condition of our skin, and then we need to repair it after climbing. It seems like it does a little bit more, takes a little bit more of a toll on my skin than just using normal chalk. But yeah, I'm curious. I haven't had a chance to use yours on a regular basis yet. What have been the effects of those extra ingredients, the honey and the essential oil, on that sort of thing?
I haven't had any problems on my own skin using it repeatedly, and I've used it extensively, even though I've just been at home and working on my own hangboards and whatnot. But I've used it extensively because I've been doing a lot of experimentation. So I'll apply it, go practice a little bit, wash it off, apply it again, and so that could have the potential to, and I would expect normally would severely dry out my hands, but the Epsom salt and the essential oils really make a difference there. So you can look for liquid chalks that do have, or for that matter, powdered chalks that have essential oils in them. So that can make a difference. And you can also just be conscious about making sure to lotion up afterwards. With somebody with eczema, I'll actually lotion up in between climbs sometimes.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But you can just make sure to do it after you climb too. And a lot of times we get in a hurry and we just sort of like wash our hands and go. But, just being more conscious of that can help, and not just after you climb, but, before you go to bed or, whenever you wash your hands, that sort of thing. That's something that can make a difference. Oh, the other one is I know that there are a couple other products that are liquid chalks that by other companies that don't have alcohol in them. So that's an option. I've tried them; they're okay. I'm not. Again, they don't tend to feel as nice as your loose chalk or some of the other brands or our brand of liquid chalk. But they're okay. But then again, like you said, a lot of gyms right now are liquid chalk only because of COVID. So sometimes you just have to do what you got to do, especially if you're in a gym.
Mm.
Take the best option. So that might be something to try too.
Okay. Well, let's get into your products, and I think we've got a discount code to share with people. And just to be really clear with people, you reached out to me, and it's Earth Day, so I thought this was a cool topic, and it seems like you're making a good product, and I want people to be able to get access to it. But I'm not getting anything out of this. I just want to be clear about that. But yeah, let's talk about what you're offering and your products and where people can find your stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So my company is called Pica. Our website is pica.life. We've got a number of different products there in different sizes, retractable lanyards. So you can almost do it one-handed and at least not worry about dropping it. You can clip that to your harness and have a couple different scents in those essential oil blends. There's one that I tried to mimic the Rockies, so I call it Rocky Mountain Alpine, and the other one is Texas Hill Country, which is a really lovely area just west of Austin where I live. So, and there's some good climbing out there. The discount code, you can get a 25% discount for listeners of this podcast. The discount code is Nugget Discount, all one word. So just okay. Nugget Discount.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'll put that. I'll put a link to that right there in your podcast app, so you can just scroll down below this episode and find a link to Matt's website, and you can find the discount code there. Did you say that you do refills too?
Well, yeah. So we have an 8-ounce version, which is, I guess you can't see it. It's a podcast. It's like the size of a shampoo bottle.
Okay.
And you can either just get that, but if you want, you can buy a combo pack of that with the small, like 1.75 ounce one that comes with a retractable lanyard. So that one you can refill from the big 8-ounce version. Got it. And then, and just take off the lid and squirt it back in. So pretty easy to do.
Any considerations about the stuff separating, storage conditions, things like that?
Yeah. So the separation is an issue with all liquid chalk. So you want to shake it vigorously before you use it, especially if it's been more than a day or two since you've used it. Like when you order any liquid chalk, not just ours, but any liquid chalk, when it shows up at your door, you want to shake it, because otherwise what ends up happening is you open it and then all the sort of alcohol and more liquidy ingredients come out, and then you're stuck with sort of a thick paste on the inside, which is hard to get out. So if you shake it up really good, then that should be fine. And if that ever does happen, or, if you just store it and come back to it several months later and it's dried out a little bit for whatever reason, maybe the lid wasn't screwed on super tight or something, you can always just pour in a little bit of alcohol into your liquid chalk, and again, shake it up really good, and you'll be good to go. In fact, this is kind of a trade secret, but you can make your own liquid chalk if you're on a budget. All it is, at its base, is you can just mix a little bit of loose chalk with a little bit of alcohol. Either ethyl or isopropyl alcohol will work, and you just stir it up and get the right consistency and put it in a container or a baggie or whatever, and you're good to go.
Cool.
It tends to be a little messier option, but if you are on a budget, you can certainly do that.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I appreciate that. And, I've bought a bottle of isopropyl. I have it in a little spray bottle. I use that for bouldering sometimes. Mm-hmm. There's different percentages. I think that's just the percentage of isopropyl alcohol versus water. Correct me if I'm wrong about that, but any considerations with that? I know you can get like the 85% or the 93 or I think 99. Yeah. Any thoughts about different concentrations of isopropyl?
Yeah. In my experimentation, I like the higher percentage, the 99+% alcohol, because the rest is just water.
Okay.
And that's okay. And in fact, many liquid chalks, including ours, does include a little bit of water, but the more water that you have in there, the longer it takes to dry. And you also run the risk of it can feel a little slimy if you put on too much. That's if you have a lot of water, and that's not a real big risk, but mostly it's just how long it takes to dry. Whereas the alcohol can dry in, literally just a few seconds. If there's more water in it, it can take upwards of a minute or two to fully dry. So I like the high percentages personally, but it's just a personal preference.
Okay. Well, cool. Okay. So pica.life for people who are interested, and Nugget discount for 25% off. Again, I'll link to the website and the discount right there in your podcast app. Matt, anything else? Anything else we should touch on before I let you go?
No, I mean, again, I just want to come back to that point, with this being Earth Day, just hold hold the businesses that you buy product from, try to hold them accountable, and ask them, go on their social media. They read that stuff and they will see, wow, a lot of our customers are really demanding better practices or more transparency. And that's how we're going to make this a better world. That's how we're going to make it a better sport. So, keep demanding better of all of us, and we'll be able to keep doing it for a long time to come.
Very cool. Yeah, that's a great message to leave people with. And thanks so much, Matt. I really appreciate your time. This is really fun. And once again, happy Earth Day.
Yeah, happy Earth Day. Thanks so much, Stephen. I appreciate you having me.
All right. Take care.
Yep. Take care.